Master, the bowing of me and you. Hopefully not to each other, right? The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. The meaning of the words, from which fluctuates, have dwindled away, refers to the mind stuff which the presented ideas have come to rest. He takes as the example the words as from a precious gem, just as a crystal is tinged by various colors of different things, next to which it lies, and appears so, having the form of the colored rupa, thing next to which it lies. Upacharya. So the mind stuff is influenced by referring to the object to be known, and comes into a state of balance with the object to be known, and appears as having the form of the object to be known in itself. Influenced by a subtle element, it comes into a state of balance with the subtle element, and seems to the subtle element itself. Likewise influenced by referring to a coarse element, it comes into a state of balance with the coarse form, and seems to have a coarse form. Similarly influenced by particular things of the world, it comes into a state of balance with a particular thing of the world, and seems to have the form of the world. An analogous situation would be found to exist also with reference to the process of knowing, that is, in the organs of sense. Influenced by referring to a process of knowing, it comes into a state of balance with the process of knowing, and appears as having the form of the process of knowing as in itself. Similarly, influenced by referring to the self as knower, it comes into a state of balance with the self as knower, and appears as having the form of the self as knower. Similarly, influenced by referring to a liberated self, it comes into a state of balance with the liberated self, and appears as having the form of the liberated self. Thus it is that the mind, which is like a precious gem, in the state of resting upon one of these, upon the knower, or upon a process of knowing, or upon the object to be known, that is, upon the self, or a sense organ, or an element, that which is in a state of being tinged by one of these, while resting upon one of these, changes into their form. This mind stuff is said to be in the balanced state. Thus, the means for stability of the mind stuff have been stated. The mastery of that mind stuff which has been reached, stability, has also been shown. Now a question is asked. When the mind has reached stability, when the object has concentration, conscious of an object, and what is concentration itself? This he acts by saying, now. Referring to this, he introduces the next sutra by saying, this is told. He recites the Sutra 41. The mind stuff is, as from a precious gem, the balanced state. He explains this by words dwindled away, the mind stuff from which the fluctuations as sources of valid ideas, when they are rajas, or of tamas, 41. As from a precious gem, the balanced state. Okay. The mind stuff from which such fluctuations as sources of valid ideas, when they are of rajas or of tamas, have dwindled away as a result of practice and of passionlessness. The explanation of this is of which the presented ideas have come to rest. In this manner, it is stated that the sattva of the mind stuff, which is naturally pure, is not overpowered by the rajas and the tamas. He makes the example clear by saying, just as the thing next to which it lies is the limiting conditioning, such as the hibiscus flower, influenced by means changed into its likeness. It appears as if marked by the form of the red or the blue or the other color which is particular to a thing, next to which it lies. He applies the illustration to the thing illustrated by saying, so the object to be known. It is influenced by, that is, it penetrates into the object to be known to which it refers. In this way, he distinguishes the object to be known from the knower and from the process of knowing. The mind stuff covers its own particular form as inner organ and comes into a state of balance with the object to be known. Or it might be said that it seems to change into an objective state of being known. As a result of this, it appears as having the form of the object to be known and is in itself. Influence, upariga, comes only from the object to be known. This he subdivides into the subtle and the coarse forms by saying, a subtle element. The particular things of the world are evidently those with an animate nature, for instance, cows, and those with inanimate nature, for instance, water jars. In accordance with this is that it has been shown that there are two concentrations, that accompanied by deliberation upon coarse objects, and that accompanied by reflection upon subtle objects, when he says analogous situation, also with reference to the processes of knowing, that is, in the organs of sense, he means that the sense organs are processes of knowing, and that by them intended objects are known. He makes the same clear by saying referring to a process of knowing. Since the process of knowing is in itself that to which it refers, it is influenced, that is, permeated by this. It covers over its own particular form as an inner organ, and senses to be changed. And seems to be changed into a process of knowing, as if it were by an outer organ. Having described in this way the concentration is accompanied by joy, he tells of that accompanied by the feeling of personality by saying similarly the self as knower, because the self as knower is the locus of the feeling of personality. This is the point, since there is no distinction between selves. Released selves, like the Chuka and the Prahlada, as objects of concentration, must be included as being described by the word similarly released. Coming to a close, he explains the words resting upon one of these three and of the state of being tinged by one of these three by saying, thus it is that the mind stuff sattva, freed from the defilement of rajas and tamas aspects by virtue of the purification of the contemplation, rest upon, that is, fixedly attends to one of these, either the knower or the process of knowing, or the object to be known. The state of being tinged by one of these three, that is, taking the form of one of them, is called the balanced state. In other words, yoga, with the distinguishing characteristic of being conscious of an object, and here the order of words in the sutra, knower or process of knowing, or object to be known, need not be heeded, since it runs counter to the order of objects intended, as given in experience. Similarly, in the comment also, the clearing of the statement with regard to the concentration upon the subtle elements as being the first in order of statements is not to be respected. Thus, all becomes satisfactory. 42. Of these balanced states, the state balanced with deliberation is confused by reason of predicate relations between words and intended objects and ideas. For example, although the word cow and the intended object cow and the idea cow are things distinct from each other, one finds that in the process of knowing they are undistinguished. When these are distinguished from each other, the properties of words are of one kind, the properties of objects intended are another kind, and the properties of thoughts are of another kind. Thus, the levels of existence, pantan, are distinct. If now a yogin has come into a state of balance with one of these objects, in the predicate relation, and if such an intended object as cow strikes upon his concentrated insight, and if it comes to him permeated with predicate relations between words and intended objects and ideas, then that confused balanced state is said to be with deliberation. The balanced state in general has been described. By classification into subdivisions, there are four kinds of it: deliberative and superdeliberative, reflective and superreflective. Of these four, he describes the state balanced in deliberation upon a coarse object in the sutra beginning with the words of these and ending with the words balanced state. Of these, that is, from among these balanced states, and it is the balanced in deliberation that is to be understood. Of what kind is this balanced state? Although in reality diverse words and intended objects and ideas have predicate relations, because the words in the other two are attributed the one to the other, and the predicate relation represents the diversity that there is in one thing and the identity that there is in diverse things. Consequently, the balanced state is confused or mixed with predicate relations between words and intended objects and ideas. When he says, for example, the word cow, it is evident that there is an idea, both of which have been appropriated by the word cow. when he says which identifies the intended object with the word and the idea, both of which have been appropriated by the intended object, cow. When he says the idea with the word and the intended object, both of which have been appropriated by the idea, cow. Thus, in ordinary life, it is evident that although word and intended object and idea are distinct, in the process of knowing, they are not distinguished. If in the process of knowing they are not distinguished, why then should there be any distinction? The reply to this, he says, when these are distinguished, when in accordance with methods and agreement of difference, they are distinguished by experts, then, 1, properties of words are of one kind. That is, a word which is nothing but a mutation of sound has such properties as high pitch. 2, properties of an intended object are of another kind. That is, such properties are insensibility and definite shape. 3, properties of an idea are of another kind. That is, illumination and no definite shape. Therefore, the level pantan of their existence is distinct. That is, the way which leads to various things themselves. When it is said that a yogin has come into a state of balance with one of these intended objects, such as a cow, then the lower perception of the yogin has been described. The rest is easy. When, however, the memory is purified from remembrances of the conventional use, samketa of words, and when the concentrated insight is free from predicate relations, and the form of ideas, either of inferences or of something that has been heard, the intended object remains as it is in itself and nothing more, and specifically characterized as having just that form which it has in itself, and as nothing more. And this is the super-deliberative balanced state. This is the higher perception, and this is the germ of inference, and of anything that has been heard. From it, inference about and anything heard have their being. Moreover, this knowledge, darkchana, is not accompanied by an idea either of an inference or of anything that has been heard. Therefore, yogin's knowledge, derived from super-deliberative concentration, is not confused by any other source of a valid idea. He illustrates the distinguishing characteristic of the super-deliberative concentration by the Sutra 43. When memory is quite purified, that balanced state which is, as it were, empty of itself, and which brightens into conscious knowledge as the intended object, and nothing more, is super-deliberative. That insight which, when the memory is quite purified from predicate relations in the form of ideas, either of inferences or of anything that has been heard, and from the conventional usage of words, is influenced by the thing in itself, sthararupa, which is to be known, and which after it is were in its form of insight, throwing off itself, the essence of which is a process of knowing, becomes the thing intended, padartha, and nothing more, and becomes, as it were, changed into the thing in itself, which is to be known. This is the super-deliberative balanced state, and as such, it has just been explained. For this balanced state, the world, so far as it is visible, whether it be an animate object, such as a cow, or whether it be an inanimate object, such as a water jar, is the formation of a single mental act, buddhi. Its essence is an intended object, and its essence is a special kind of conglomeration of atoms, and this particular kind of arrangement which constitutes an object and its apparent form, dharma, common to the subtle elements which compose it, and is conferred as being a whole. From its phenomenalized effects, it is self-dependent, and presents itself by changing into its phenomenal form by operations of conditions which phenomenalize it, sva, and it disappears when another apparent form arises in consciousness. This same apparent form is called a whole avayavan, and it is this that is one, and great or very small and tangible, and that in which actions occur and impermanent. By this kind of whole, the business of life is carried on, but one to whom such a particular conglomeration is not perceptibly real, since an indefinite first impression, a vikalpa, a subtle cause is imperceptible for him. Since there is no whole, nearly everything in accordance with the statement that an erroneous idea is not based upon the form, Book 1, number 8, of that in respect of which the idea is entertained is reduced to the erroneous idea, and then what would be a complete idea, seeing that there are no objects in which it would refer. For whatever is perceived, all that is a bit influenced by its nature of being a whole having parts, therefore a whole exists, which becomes changed by receiving what is called sizes and the like. This is the object of the superdeliberative balanced state. In order to show the connexion of the sutra, he explains first that the superdeliberative consecration by saying, when, however, purification is removal, for certainly inference and verbal communication begin to function when occasioned by memories of the conventional use of words, and this conventional usage has its essence in the false attribution to each other of the word and the intended object and the idea cow, and as a result of this, the two predicate relations in the form of an idea, either of an inference or of a verbal communication, arise. So when occasioned by one of these, concentrated insight still has deliberation upon some coarse object, but when the mind, insofar as it is absorbed in the intended object and nothing more, and is zealous for the intended object and for nothing more, reaches by practice upon this intended object a state of inseparable fusion with this object, then the memory of conventional usages is thrown off. And when these are thrown off, predicate relations in the form of an idea, either of an influence or of anything heard, which two are rooted in memory, are thrown off, then in the concentrated insight, freed from these predicate relations, the intended object remains as it is in itself and nothing more, and becomes accurately characterized as having just that form of which it has in itself and as nothing more, and as not having any form of predicate relations. Well, see, it's a different way of living in the moment, isn't it? This is the super-deliberative balanced state. This is the higher perception of the yogin, since it is in it. There is not even a trace of false attribution. An objection might be raised. This may be so, but yogins, having known that-ness of the intended object, makes it consistent with other knowledge, and teach it. And how can this intended object be taught by verbal communication, or be made consistent by inference, which is intended for another, both of which cases, not referring to that object which is intended in the higher perception. Accordingly, verbal communication and inference must refer to that higher object, and since these two are predicate relations, the higher perception is also nothing but a predicate relation. In reply to this, he says, and this, anything heard, for if this, like that with deliberation, were accompanied by inference, or by anything that had been heard, that is, if it had been tainted by either of these, then it would be confused. But it is only the germ of these two. For from it, inference and anything that has been heard have their being, and it is not the rule that whatever is the cause of an effect has the same object as the effect as itself, same object as itself as its effect. And because the idea of smoke is the cause of the idea of fire, it does not therefore have this fire for its object. Consequently, the yogins, having known the thatness of the intended object by a perception free of predicate relations, teach it and make it consistent through the medium of predicate relations. He sums up by saying, therefore, and shows the connexion with the sutra, which is to be explained by using the word superdeliberative. The sutra begins with the words 48. When the memory is quite purified. The purification is the removal of the memory which follows, tasmad, upon the predicate relation, which has nothing but the idea of the inference, and of anything that has been heard of the conventional usage of words. When this occurs, tatsyam, and in the case purification from the memory of conventional usages is the cause, hetu, and the purification from the memory of ideas, such as anything that has been heard is the effect, hetumant, and the word inference is to be understood as expressing the object of the section, as expressing that which is inferred, and not from that which is inference is drawn. It is a word denoting a thing to be inferred, the word as it were, and the clause as it were itself, svam eva, is out of the right position and should be constructed after the words throwing off. He rejects the theory that there is in the state a diversity of objects by saying to this a single. It is, one, the formation of a single mental act, in the sense that it forms or brings forth a single mental act. Consequently, since it is a single atom, it is single the atoms, and that they are many, are not the objects of the super-deliberative balanced state. What he has wished to say is this, assuming that they are fit to be the object of the balanced state, still in that they are very subtle, and because they are collected into a manifold, each unit of which has its own subtle idea, they are not fit to be the object of a presented idea, which brightens into a conscious knowledge of the unity of the single intended object, which has magnitude, mahatva, as contrasted with anu. An objection, granted that the atoms are real existences, then the so-called coarseness would be only a subjective samvrta property of which shines clearly in consciousness. In reply to this, he says, its essence is an intended object. The point is that when once a coarse object as a whole has been established in the experience, it cannot, unless there be something inhibitory, be denied. To those vaicesika who think that the animate things like cows and inanimate things like water jars are produced by binary and other atoms in gradations, he says, conglomeration of atoms. A conglomeration of atoms is a mutation in gross form, and this form of mutation differentiates it from other coarse mutations. That in which the differentiated mutation is the essence. In other words, the thing in itself, svarupa, is that which is called a conglomeration of atoms. Animate things, such as cows, possess an animate seat of experience, and such inanimate things as water jars are merely inanimate objects of this balanced state, and both of these same two kinds of objects are seen, lokyate, and so each may be called the world, loka. So as far as is visible to this balanced state, it might be objected this conglomeration, which is a gross form of mutation, might be either different from the subtle elements or not different from them. Remember that chant? Loka samasta sukhinu bhavantu, loka samasta sukhinu bhavantu. Anyways, if it be different from them, how can it be the common substrate for them? And how can it be the form, akara, which gives them oneness? For a water jar is a different thing from a piece of cloth and cannot be the substrate, the properties of the piece of cloth, nor can it be that which gives the form of oneness to the piece of cloth. If, on the other hand, it, the object, is as far as visible, which is a conglomeration of atoms, be not different from its subtle atoms, then it would be like them, subtle and not common. The whole group. The point is this. Any such thing as a water jar is not absolutely different from the atoms, neither is it absolutely identical with them. In case it were different, a horse and a cow are not different. The relation between them of substance to its properties could not be consistently explained, and in case it were identical so that the atoms were like the substance, then this substance could not be consistently explained. Consequently, it is in some respects different from some respects identical, and so it must be if all is to be consistently explained by putting the word subtle elements in the genitive case. It indicates that there is some respect to difference and that the whole words, it is self-dependent, and there is an identity. It is inferred by its phenomenalized effect, phenomenalized in the sense that its effect is so experienced, the phenomenalized in the sense that it serves the business of life, and it is proven by inference to anyone who takes the opposite view. And insofar as it is identical with its cause, we may consistently say that it has the form of its cause. Accordingly, he says, by changing into its phenomenal form, by operation of the conditions which phenomenalize it. Is this apparent form, dharma, which is identical with it, permanent? He gives a negative answer in the words, when another apparent form. Another apparent form, that is a potsherd, is another apparent form of a water jar, broken into pieces. That is, that this whole has a form, not to be found, vyavrittam, and the atoms he shows by saying this same, for it has properties which give it specific character, such as the holding of honey or water, which actions are other than actions, which could be accomplished by atoms. The whole is known, not only by perceptible experience, but by the business of life, since the conduct of men depends upon these wholes. This he states in the words, and by this. A Buddhist objection, this may be true, if there were nothing to contradict, experience might establish, by the help of inference, that the mutation in its gross form is having whole parts. But, there is a contradiction, for, in the line of reasoning, all that exists is without parts, like thought, vijnana, and such things as cows and water jars exist. We have a natural and valid middle term, that is existence. But the point is made that there is no existence in coarse form. For existence is subsumed, vyapta, under absence of contradictory qualities, and connexion with contradictory qualities, which is contradictory with it, that is existence being found to exist in a thing having parts, excludes existence also, since, in such a case, something contrary to the subsumer, which is absence of contradictory qualities, has been found. And so, to revert to the original point, there is in the whole a connexion with the contradictory qualities, for example, belonging to that place and not belonging to that place, being covered and not being covered, being red and not red, moving and not moving. Accordingly, wholes in gross form do not exist. In reply to this, he says, but one to whom the intention of what was first exerted by this, the whole in gross form, is now said to be given in experience, and to be an action realizing a purpose. The existence which is given as the middle term, hetu, must either be given by experience and be such as even a plowman with dusty feet can understand, or it must be other than what is given by experience. Of these two, the latter is not a middle term, since it is given in experience. That is, it must be itself established by existing in the middle term. But water jars and such things have an existence given in experience, namely activity realizing a purpose. This form is not other than its gross form. It is this form given by experience and realizing a purpose is the middle term. That is existence and removing the existence of coarseness. As thus defined, this middle term destroys itself. In reply to this, the Buddhist says, existence is not a permanent coarseness, but is negation of non-existence, and coarseness is negative non-coarseness. Moreover, negativations differ according to the variations of the things negatified. So even when there is no coarseness, there is no destruction of existence. The reply to this would be, by reason of variations in the negativations, we may admit that there is a variation in the objects of the determination of asaya. But would you, sir, be good enough to say that the object of the source of the valid idea, which is not a first faint impression, vikalpa, and which is the necessary condition per vaka for the determinations. For if you say that the atoms of color, which arise continuously, and the minute, thatness of which is unknown, are the object, the reply is very well. These are intermingled with the atoms of odor and taste and touch, and are therefore not continuous. Therefore, if it be unaware of the intermediate atoms, this indefinite first impression based upon the atoms, like the presented idea of a forest, as single and as dense, although it too is full of intermediate spaces, would be false. Accordingly, the indefinite first impression proceeding from this other faint impression are not even immediately in relation with the perceptible object. Thus, how could one succeed in establishing that there are no parts in existences which are determined by these indefinite first impressions? Therefore, if one desires to hold the validity of perceptions which are definite later impressions, the existence of that very coarseness which is being experienced by this perception must be admitted, even if one does not assent to that which is to be determined by the perception, which is definite and later impression. To proceed, if existence inhibits this kind of perception, it would inhibit itself. Then, that atoms are exceedingly subtle, and that they become objects of experience through the medium of other kinds of atoms. To acknowledge this is self-destructive. Having this in view, he says, one to whom this particular conglomeration, which is not perceptibly real, is the object of perception, which is definite and latter impression. One, that is, who says that the subtle atoms should therefore be objects of perceptions, which are definite and latter impressions, by him who replies, since by an indefinite first impression a subtle cause is imperceptible, for the reason that for him there is no whole, everything, according to the characterization given, Book 1, verse 8, that an erroneous idea is not based on that form in respect to which it is entertained, is reduced to the erroneous idea that all which rest upon coarseness, and all which rest upon the existence which is the locus of this coarseness. It might be objected that even so, and finally, knowledge is not erroneous in regard to oneself, because this does not appear as a whole having parts. In reply to this, he says, nearly. The objector might reply, what even if it be so? In reply to this, he says, and then, if such an idea as that of existence be erroneous, then such an idea caused by existence or something of the kind as this, that there are no wholes having parts, would be also erroneous, because its object also, insofar as having something to be determined, is something